Story 1. I ask a question to encourage people to talk about themselves. If that does not work, I try a joke. If that still does not work, it is a sign for me to focus on the food or the activity of the date and to forget about the person. Story 2. When I go on a date with someone who is not participating in the conversation, I start monologuing to them. I tell them all my stories. Usually, something happens in a story that sparks a conversation, and the date gets back on track. Story 3. When there is an awkward silence on a date, I usually just smile and say, well, I guess we are already so in sync we can enjoy the silence together. That usually makes us laugh and breaks the tension. If it still feels a bit too quiet, I will throw in something unexpected like, if you could have dinner with any person, real or fictional, who would it be? Questions like that work better than any script. Story 4. Not just for dates but for conversations in general, ask questions. If you are about to make a statement, think about how you could turn it into a question. Story 5. I'm just horrible at determining if a silence is awkward or not. Silence doesn't bother me. I try to feel out the situation and keep the conversation going at a reasonable pace. If my date seems uncomfortable, I ask her if I have cum in my hair or something. Story 6. If you feel the need to break the silence, you can just smile or make a funny face to cause a smile or laughter. You could also ask, what are you thinking about? Or ask any random question. Being yourself is most important. Sometimes silence is good too. Embrace it. Story 7. Which Monopoly piece do you think is the most appealing? Story 8. So many sips of the beverage. Normally, I swig, but you have to leave yourself enough liquid if it is going to be a consistent thing. Story 9. If you are male, give a monologue on one of 3 topics, depending on your interest. World War II, The Lord of the Rings, Attack on Titan. Story 10. The awkwardness is in the perception. If you perceive the silence as a failure that you need to fill, you will be awkward and the silence will be awkward. If you can relax and have fun, it will fill itself. Either you or your partner will have something to say. Story 11. Honestly, I tried nice shoes 4 times. I wasn't smart, although it worked 3 out of 4 times, and one of those times I married. Story 12. Do something fun on a date. You will not have awkward silences. Forget dinner. Forget the movies. Go do something together. Story 13. I remind myself that I am not obligated to fill the silence since conversation is a 2-person event. If they have not asked me any questions, then it is time for a stare down. Story 14. Ask questions. Dating people is about getting to know them. Prepare a list of questions about what is important to you and bring it on your phone if you do not feel confident remembering them. Story 15. It is not great advice, but it works. Ask to take a photo together. The alcohol will help you both relax. You can start talking about which drinks or cocktails you like. Story 16. Embrace it. I do not think it is awkward. You do not know each other that well yet. You both might be nervous. Silence can happen and is not necessarily a bad thing. Smile and relax. Story 17. You can avoid awkward silences by talking about meaningful topics. Keep asking questions until you find one in common. If an awkward silence does happen, talk about the silence itself. I always like self-deprecation in times like that. Story 18. Call out the awkward silence and how uncomfortable it is, but in a funny, self-aware way. This can lead into a conversation about awkward silences, how they make you feel, and examples from your past. You can talk about anything. Story 19. My go-to for any awkward silence is to cast the spell. Fat penguin. Huh? Oh, sorry. I was just trying to break the ice. Story 20. What my date does not know is that shortly after we sat down, I removed my left shoe and sock. When the silence hit, I tickled their ankle with my pinky toe and fully committed to a staring contest. Story 21. Start talking about your hobby that the other person probably does not care about. Fill them in on the Warhammer lore or your theories on Star Wars lore. If they are interested, then you have a match. If they do not engage, then you may not be for each other. Story 22. I start asking questions about them. If there are many awkward silences, I think the date has not gone well. Story 23. My partner went on a blind date with someone. Neither of them spoke until she said she did not feel well, and he drove her home in silence. Story 24. I relax and learn to be comfortable with silence. If there is a specific reason for the awkwardness, then I try to address it. If I feel like asking her a question, then I will, but otherwise I just accept that sometimes neither person has much to say at the moment. Story 25. I would wait for the server to come by and say something like, "Let's hope this person is better at pretending than keeping conversations. Am I right?" Story 26. This is when you let your bowels loose and release a large fart. Eventually, you will be doing this regularly in front of the person, and the fart speaks for itself. It says, "This person does not lie. It has worked for me every time." Story 27. Now that we have the small talk out of the way, let's get into the important conversation. What do you see yourself doing in 5 years? Story 28. Dates are meant to help two people figure out if they connect. This is done verbally by observing behavior during activities, and occasionally it will get quiet. Why is it quiet? A good quiet means something significant happened and both people are processing it. A bad quiet means you have already learned what you need to learn. I have been married a long time, and my wife and I still have questions for each other. I want to know what she thinks. She wants to know what I think. On your date, there are countless things that you do not know about the other person. You can ask anything and the other person can answer. They can ask anything and you can answer. If there is nothing more that either of you care to know, then the date should be over. In summary, awkward silences are broken by the next question or topic you want to ask or share. They are not harmful. They are only bad when they indicate a lack of interest in the other person. Story 29. Silence is golden, not awkward. I had a date with a man, Kevin, who was terrible at communication. I started the night, "So, tell me about yourself, Kevin." I waited for a flood of information, from where he was raised, to what his parents and siblings were like, to what he wanted out of life. What did I get? There isn't much to tell. Then, dead silence. He didn't ask me about myself either. Just dead silence. Silence can be weaponized. If you just leave it hanging there, it becomes overwhelming. It fills the space so quickly that moving past it is impossible unless someone makes a big effort. I like to see what the other person does with that heavy silence. I give direct eye contact and wait. Getting to know someone is simply a matter of using your curiosity about who the other person is to ask questions. If you run out of questions, you either aren't curious enough or you don't care. When I asked that all-encompassing question to Kevin, there should have been a flood of responses. When there was not a single one, I had my answer. He didn't know. Never date a person who doesn't know who he is. Story 30. First date with my now boyfriend. We both just embraced it. We opened up pretty early in that date. Moments of non-stop talking, then it waned. Occasional eye contact, and I leaned my head on his shoulder here and there as we walked. Holding his hand, playing on the back of it with my thumb. We got comfortable quickly with the moments of silence when we were getting tired by the end of the day. Story 31. Learn to be comfortable in the uncomfortable by being secure in who you are. Sometimes those are the most real moments. Story 32. So tough a time to be alive. Huh? Were you born this way or had a sex change? Would you like to see my collection of rocks? Story 33. Call back to the conversation with a question. You all were just talking about work, and now it is quiet. So what made you choose to go into that? How do you like it? Easy money. Story 34. I love conversation, but I also do not mind silence. I could happily talk nonstop for 15 hours straight on a road trip, or sit in silence for 15 hours lost in thought. Silence can be interpreted by some as awkward and by others as no issue. So how do you handle it if you feel silence is awkward? Work on it. Do not focus on needing to find something to say. Accept that if there is nothing to say, then nothing needs to be said. Live in the moment. Enjoy the energy and peace around you. Get lost in thought. Enjoy just existing. Story 35. Honestly, I have a small mental list of random things to talk about with people. If your facial expressions and body language appear confident, then it's not awkward. You can ask, what is the most important thing going on in your life currently? This can bring up a lot of conversation because it focuses on their interests, values, and priorities happening right now, not basic personality traits or random hobbies. I recently went out with a guy. We had dinner, then went to a few bars, and throughout the night we went back and forth asking each other questions about anything. It was fun in a natural way, not back-to-back questions. Story 36. Anytime I feel strange, I go on my phone. I have a lot of content on my phone, including a medieval game, specifically a jousting game. I also have an alarm set on my phone. Story 37. Learned this line from Love on the Spectrum. So far, it has worked out well. I ran out of things to say, but I'm still having a great time. Shout out to my friend Tanner. Story 38. Horse manure is not that bad. I do not even mind the word manure. It is newer, which is good. And there is a ma in front of it. Manure. When you consider the other choices, manure is actually pretty refreshing. Story 39. Silence occasionally is normal in face-to-face communication. Just ask any simple question about the other person. Story 40. Maybe I've watched too much Live on the Spectrum, but Tanner has a great line for awkward silences. He says, I know I'm not talking much right now, but I'm having a really great time. Haha, I just loved it. Story 41. Usually, ask them a question about their perspective on something or one that reveals personal preferences we can explore. I have a bunch of random questions from hanging out on Discord and connecting with people. Ideally, the question is somewhat topical, but if you express genuine interest in them, you are doing fine. Do you have any favorite secret flavor enhancers stashed in your kitchen for cooking? Where was the last place you went to dance? If you could skip work and do anything tomorrow morning, what would you do? Questions like this get people talking and usually start a thread that you can continue easily. That is an important part. You have to be genuinely curious about the answer. Don't just listen and say, oh, cool. Recently, I asked my mom, if someone just gave you a sports car worth about $350,000, would you drive it? This became a fun conversation about what you would do with it instead, why you might not drive it in public, what concerns you would have, and why you laugh at the idea. Story 42. Start by discussing the topics you mentioned before the date. Then talk about yourself and ask them about similar experiences from their perspective. If they start talking, do not interrupt. If you cannot maintain the conversation by sharing about yourself and engaging in a balanced exchange, then you might come across as uninteresting. Story 43. The silence probably is not as awkward as you are thinking. Nobody has something to say all the time. Embrace the silence and enjoy your time together. Story 44. I have not been on the dating scene in a long time, but the best advice is to stay interested and curious. Keep the conversation going with open-ended questions about the other person. If you are carrying the conversation the entire date, do not agree to a second one. At least this approach will get you through the first date most of the time. Story 45. You do not want the date to sound like an interview, so here is a simple conversation hack that works well. What is something you did recently that was at least a little interesting? Did you cook a new meal? Go to the cinema? Take a nice walk somewhere? Anything. Turn that into a question by starting with your own anecdote. It always sounds natural. I went to the cinema yesterday and saw Friendship. Have you seen that? Do you go to the cinema often? I had a really delicious dinner last Wednesday at an Indian restaurant. Have you been? Do you like Indian food? Story 46. I love silence on a first date, to be honest. If there is silence and neither of us feels the need to hastily fill it, that is a huge green flag for me. Story 47. Very softly say, this is nice. Sometimes it is good to just spend time together with someone quietly so you have a moment to reflect on things. Story 48. On a serious note, do not think for them. Just ask questions. People like talking about themselves more than you think. Story 49. Not well if it is a first date. I try to immediately find something to talk about. With my girlfriend, Silence is not awkward between us. Story 50. Ask questions. Have some scripted for these moments. Ask about hometown and best restaurant in that town. Things like favorite childhood memories and so on. Story 51. If silences during a date are awkward and not embraced by simply being in the moment, something is missing in my opinion. Story 52. I go through various topics or phrases in my head that I can ask next if my partner is being slow about it. But I think that with a person who is essentially yours, there should not be long pauses. Story 53. Pass gas loudly. If they laugh, they are a keeper. If they leave, you will have saved heartache down the line. If they pass gas back, congratulations, you have just met the love of your life. Story 54. My college roommate Pete taught me to ask, "What do you think about snakes?" It will always lead to an interesting conversation. Story 55. Have a completely random question ready that is designed to spark a conversation. Something like the other person said, "Which president would you rather have dinner with?" It might feel a little awkward, but it acknowledges the silence, breaks it in a lighthearted and non-serious way, and also shows the other person that you are still interested in talking to them. When I was dating, my go-to questions were about the recent Game of Thrones season or whether they thought the dress was blue or gold. Story 56. Google conversation starters. My wife and I have been doing this at the end of the day or while driving. Story 57. I like bringing up vacations or travel. It is very easy for conversations to branch off in many ways from this topic. Story 58. Randomly make a pterodactyl noise and see how they react. If they cannot handle it, we are probably not a good match anyway. Story 59. Calm my mind. Look gently at my date. Admire their beauty. Notice the little details of their gestures and appreciate how beautiful they are. Be in the moment. Story 60. Awkward talking can either improve and transition into a normal conversation or remain very awkward, indicating that we may not be compatible. Alternatively, if the vibe is good, you can try holding her hand or putting an arm around her. However, this is probably best if the date was going well before the awkward silence. Story 61. Here is the only way to solve that problem. Before you protest or dismiss it, try it and see how it works. Start talking about how you will begin fixing the world. Talk about how radical the fixes are that you want envisioned. Try it. Story 62. Don't be afraid of silences. Take time to think. Enjoying one's own company is not just about conversation. It involves many factors. Story 63. Did you know that during the Second Red Scare, the United States fired many homosexual employees because they were afraid the Soviet Union would blackmail them? Story 64. When I was still dating, now married, I used humor as a social lubricant. It helps if you don't take yourself seriously. Nobody really should. We are all weird, scared human beings anyway. As long as you treat people with kindness and respect and live with a little twinkle in your eye, things will open up. Story 65. If you are the type of person who has a problem with new people, there are options. Make sure your date involves an activity. Bowling is a great option. You take turns, but if the conversation is flowing, you can sit and talk. Pool, darts, bags, arcade games, don't worry if you are not good at them. You can totally be bad. This is not about showing off. It's a learning experience. Also, don't choose anything you can't pause. Don't ruin a conversation because you can't take your turn immediately. Conversation comes first. Ask about them. People like talking about themselves and appreciate when others show interest in their lives. Ask about their job, past pets, favorite movies, best concert they've attended, siblings, or cousins. There are no stupid questions when you ask someone about themselves. This is a date, and there is an expectation that you will talk about casual topics. If they don't want to discuss something, then move on. Have questions ready to go. Not on cards or anything, but the day before, write down 6 to 10 interesting questions you can ask. Writing them down cements the ideas in your head so you are not thinking on the fly. People often mess this up. They think, I can come up with stuff, and then they blank out during the situation. Ask anyone who regularly does presentations. Writing it down and practicing is the best way to organize your thoughts. Keep a mental list of questions you didn't have time to ask before the conversation moved on. There are times in a conversation when you have a question, but the person moves on before you can ask. Saying, going back to topic, what happens when detail shows you were paying attention and actively engaged. I went on a date with a girl who took notes, and it was great. When a point concluded naturally, she would look down and say, I had this question, and we would dive right back into it. Don't be afraid to ask blunt questions that encourage the person to talk. During a lull in the conversation, my aunt will say, tell me about topic. Conversations don't have to feel completely natural. Tell me about your favorite movie. Tell me about the last time you traveled. Tell me about your favorite coffee. Talk show hosts like Seth Meyers and Conan O'Brien do this because it invites open discussion on the subject. Tell me about your favorite post on Reddit. Story 66. Tell a joke. Just memorize one and keep it in your metaphorical pocket for when you need to use it. Story 67. I like awkward silence in this situation. It is a good test to see how long your date will speak and what they will say next. Just remain quiet yourself. Story 68. I lock eyes with them, shoot them a quick smile, and let out an exhale through my nose. One of those exhales someone might do to a mildly funny joke. Then I look away until I think of something. If nothing comes to mind, I repeat these steps until an idea emerges or the awkward silence passes. I feel like it gives them permission to relax in the silence. It also gives me a moment to pick a topic I know I can talk about, one they might be interested in too. Story 69. If you are genuinely concerned about this, go to the date with several questions or topics in mind so you do not have to think of something on the fly. Story 70. Well, if we are having an awkward silence and still enjoying each other's company, then why ruin the moment, right? Just let me know she might be the one. Story 71. I generally focus on either things we have discussed or focus on family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. You can usually generate enough conversation from those to keep any truly awkward silence at bay. If an awkward silence was due to a faux pas or mistake, I apologize and attempt to steer the conversation to positive topics. Story 72. I would like to share one of my many humorous anecdotes. The trouble is, I have yet to meet anyone funnier than myself. Story 73. Questions that are not just about what do you do for a living or do you have siblings, that are not too private but still break the ice. Story 74. Ask for more detail or clarification about something they talked about earlier. This shows you have been listening and that you are interested in them. Ask about their job, hobbies, or interests, then listen to the answers and use the details to ask more questions. Encourage people to talk about themselves. Another option is to compliment something innocuous, like their hair, clothes, jewelry, or fingernails. Story 75. A date is one of the few social contexts where you can talk about almost anything and it is totally fine. Ask a question. Make an observation. My favorite, give a compliment. Raise the heat just a fraction of a degree and read their reaction. It is also totally okay to leave a date if it is not going well. If you are at a cafe or a dinner with a person who clearly does not want to be there, then leave. Otherwise, they like you and it is the easiest thing in the world. Just enjoy being with them. If you are having a good time, they will loosen up and have a good time too. Story 76. Some awkward silence is normal on a date, so I sit with the silence and just enjoy the other person's company for a moment. If you have a particularly bold question you want to ask, awkward silences can be a good opportunity to do so. Often, those silences result from unspoken tension, and daring to open that line of communication can relieve a lot of pressure for both people, even if it feels a little uncomfortable at the moment. Story 77. Get active on the first date with an activity you both might enjoy, such as indoor rock climbing if you are physically fit. You have many choices. Story 78. I try to have a few topics that I think are important to bring up just to see if we are compatible at first. For example, what do you do for a living, hobbies, travel preferences, and so on. Maybe save the more personal topics like children and religion for later. Story 79. If I have tried 3 times to start a conversation and it is not working, then I stop, grit my teeth, and sit in silence. If I provide all the content, they will coast by, and if they are doing that on the first date, they will continue to do that. Story 80. I ask questions about them with follow-up questions. It is an art I had to learn, but it was either learn something on a date or just look at each other awkwardly. Story 81. For minutes and the comments are overwhelming me. The answer is you do not stop. Keep the conversation going no matter what. Story 82. Awkward silences on a date indicate what you can expect during the entire relationship if you decide to continue. Story 83. Honestly, I interpret awkward silence during dates as a lack of interest. I dislike having to carry the entire conversation. Story 84. If there is awkward silence on a date, then obviously the two of you have very little in common. Dating is not just about looks. It does not matter how attractive your date is. If you have nothing else in common, then it is over. It is as simple as that. Perhaps date based on your common goals, values, and focus less on physical traits. Those are not what make a couple or a family. Memories that last a lifetime. Do not blow it over something trivial. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.